to rise to. These types of foreshadowing of the conflicts that we can have is obviously the content that's been missed by this administration as they looked to Russia, as they looked to their threatening Ukraine, their lack of responsiveness. I was very disappointed today as the president was at NATO. President Zelensky addressed the NATO leaders of the heads of state. And when asked about the use of chemical weapons, the use of what red lines that perhaps we should have, the president waffled again. He said, well, our response would be in kind. It would be depend upon what the use of chemical weapons would be. Well, I mean, that's almost back, harkens us to when his statement of, well, it depends on how far they go into Ukraine. I mean, if chemical weapons are used, they're used to murder people in Ukraine. That should be a red line. The president should strongly state that, especially when he's standing with the other NATO heads of state. This continues to be an issue for our conference as we talk about the need for strength and investment in military capabilities to respond to Russia, to respond to the threats from China. It was great to hear from Ambassador Condoleezza Rice, Secretary Rice today, was very clear that Reagan's mantra of peace through strength is a reality, it's a maxim, and she gave us several examples of it being utilized that makes the world safer, and that how today we're less safe because the administration continues to say what it will not do, will continue to say what it is concerned about instead of saying what it will do and making it clear to Russia of the actions that NATO will do in a unified manner if Russia does cross red lines. And with that, we'll take your questions.
I wanted to ask about, thank you. So Congress, in some ways or the other, we've seen the last couple of weeks, they've been a couple steps ahead of the president when it comes to Russia. When it comes to the oil ban, there was bipartisan support for that very early on. There's also on trade with Russia. I'm curious, you were just talking about chemical warfare, what that may look like if Russia at any point does move forward with that. What are you all talking about on Capitol Hill that you could propose potentially? Is there any bipartisan consensus on legislation to potentially get ahead of the White House again on this front?
I will say, I went to Poland with a very politically diverse group of members, and we all came back unified. We need to help Ukraine. And primarily getting the lethal weapons in. My biggest criticism is back in November, I'd signed off on a military package, and they sat on it until just before the invasion. It seemed like everything had to happen after the invasion. Then Secretary Lloyd Austin says, well, it's more difficult to get the weapons in because the Russians are there. Well, yeah, we could have had the MiGs in there. We could have had, the lethal drones in there. We could have had, the S-300s that were desperately trying, that's anti-aircraft, right now. And so to your point, I agree with you. I think Congress, in a bipartisan way, is ahead of the administration when it comes to sanctions, when it comes to blocking Russian energy imports, into the United States, when it comes to getting lethal weapons into the United States. And to, Mike's point, they have to start having this discussion. And I've had it with the administration, but as a presence in Europe with NATO, NATO needs to be talking about what are the red lines if, God forbid, he throws a chemical weapon in out of desperation because his military's not doing well. It's pretty clear. I mean, that's really been the biggest surprise of this whole thing. Is how we overestimated the Russian military, underestimated the Ukrainian resistance, who were trained by our Green Berets, by the way. And they put up a very good fight. And so, but what are the red lines on chemical weapons and short-range tactical nukes? To me, that's a game changer. And I think the administration and NATO needs to set a red line there saying, if this happens, it's unacceptable, there will be consequences. Now we have to discuss what are those consequences. We don't want escalation or World War III, but it's hard to sit back idly and watch weapons of mass destruction now being thrown into a country after all the horrific images that we've already seen. You want to answer?
Ranking Member McCall, what is Biden not doing that he should be doing currently in Ukraine? And you mentioned red lines. What would be a red line for you in terms of sending Americans into Ukraine to fight the Russians?
I don't think anybody wants American soldiers in Ukraine. The no-fly zone would put us at immediate war with Russia because NATO planes will obviously be in conflict with the Russian aircraft. I wish he would stop talking about what he wouldn't do. I will not do this. I will not do that. He should keep all options on the table. Condoleezza Rice told us that today as well. That's a bad diplomacy posture. It's also a very bad message to say a minor incursion's okay, like going into the Donbass. I mean, that sent, that laid the predicate for aggression. But I do think the red line's important. And how are we going to respond if this happens? I keep saying he's like the scorpion. If he's backed in a corner, he's going to come out stinging. And the best, he's got chemical, but these short-range tactical nukes are the ones that I don't see how the world can sit back and watch the bully pick on the little kid on the playground, or like Davy and Goliath, and do nothing in response to that. The question is, what is the response? And that's something we are talking about at very high levels in the administration, both Mike and myself, about what would be the appropriate red line consequence. But it can't be like Obama setting a red line in Syria and chemical weapons are laid down and then there's no consequence. If you have any thoughts.
In the past 10 years, there has been a NATO country that has shot down a Russian plane. It was Turkey. Turkey gave them a warning. They gave them a red line. Do not continue to enter into our airspace. They did again. Turkey took down a Russian military craft. It did not result in an exchange with NATO. It did not result in nuclear war or World War III. What there was a clear red line. An action was taken, and there was action that occurred. I think having clarity of what Russia should not do as a red line is incredibly important, or we're going to constantly be facing, as we have with this administration, the reaction or the trying to catch up. As was asked earlier, Congress is leaning in, but Russia is continuing on, and this administration continues to be in a reacting mode rather than making it clear that there are red lines, there are norms upon which that this administration believes that it would absolutely result in a response by the United States and NATO, whatever that response may be. That just an understanding that there are those red lines, I think, can help deter and contain Russia.
And, I also think, what is provocative, right? This administration's been one hand tied behind their back. Oh, it's provocative to put MiGs in, provocative to do a red line. Putin is the provocative one here. Why not draw a red line and say, you know what, if you cross this line, you're the one, that's being provocative. And I don't see how the world can sit by and watch chemical or nuclear weapons being used in direct violation of the Geneva Convention, which makes him a war criminal. And, the USG, as Blinken said, has already determined there's enough evidence killing civilians in maternity hospitals that he is. But if he throws chemical and nuclear in, to me, that makes the case even stronger. And I think in Congress, we'll be looking at a resolution, on basically war crimes.
We woke up to news today that North Korea launched an ICBM for the first time since 2017. This is coming after the Biden administration imposed new sanctions after several recent other missile tests. What is your reaction to that, and do you think that the Biden administration has been underestimating North Korea?
I think the Biden administration has been emboldening our adversaries and weakening our allies and the security of our allies. And I think this action from North Korea is part of that, seeking the attention of this administration that Iran is getting, that Russia is getting, that China is getting. But it is a capability that we have understood, and we understood that North Korea was seeking to achieve it, and that it was going to place the United States, the continental United States at risk. And this administration should have had this on its agenda. They tend to think that adversaries are not really a threat to the United States, instead of looking to the heart of what's important to our national security. And I think, again, you see them in a reaction mode instead of a proactive mode of what needs to be done on the international stage to make certain that the United States is secure.
And I think, they launched these, what they called hypersonics, and we can debate the intelligence, but in January. And now we see they had a launch, yesterday? But it shows you, when the American people ask, why do we care about Ukraine? The ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, myself, were saying, no, it's important. If freedom and democracy is not enough for you, energy certainly should be. But what will be the geopolitical consequences of us ignoring this invasion? And now we're seeing very clearly that it impacts, Chairman Xi in Taiwan, but also North Korea, also Iran. I asked the question point blank to some analysts without getting into classified. Did, Afghanistan embolden Iran? The answer is yes. So now we're in this geopolitical conflict, that's shaping up with this unholy alliance between Xi and Putin and Beijing, where they're committing to, territorial aggression for each other that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And you're seeing that they have one thing in common. They're all dictators, they're all oppressive, they censor, they're bullies. But they're all lining up now against the free world. And what you're seeing is this major power conflict between Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and NATO and the free world, the likes of which we really haven't seen since World War II. And I think that's why it's so important. I'll let Jochen Broker.
Thank you. A lot of this conference has been mentioning of what you guys will do when you're in the majority, if you're in the majority. And I'm wondering what, both from your perspective in intelligence and your perspective in foreign relations, what that relationship with Biden will look like. That's all depending, right, where we are in Ukraine next year. But if it does continue into the next year, or the other conflicts, geopolitical conflicts you just mentioned, what is that dynamic of a Republican House and a Democratic president going to look like?
Mine's quicker. A Republican.
You can only say so much.
Yes, a Republican House for the Intelligence Committee means an Intelligence Committee that once again looks to intelligence and our national security. This should not be a political committee. It has been made a political committee. We are going to focus on national security and how we can marry intelligence to policymakers and decision makers that can enhance our security. With that, we, of course, will be challenging the administration on making certain that they're taking the steps necessary to make America safe.
And I think this is, foreign affairs has traditionally been a bipartisan committee. Politics stops at the water's edge, and we pride ourselves on that. But the Intelligence Committee, I think, has been, unfortunately, destroyed by partisan politics, by a political agenda. And it didn't used to be that way. I remember, Mike Rogers and Dutch Ruppersberger and Jane Harman. Traditionally, House Intel has been unified as Americans in working with an administration for what's best for the United States of America. When we travel abroad, we're not Republicans, Democrats. We are meeting with foreign governments as Americans. And there's a unifying aspect to that. And I hope we can, I think, I was abundantly pleased when Mike Turner became, Kevin McCarthy's pick. He was the most competent, qualified person. I know he's probably the most intelligent person on the issues. But he also doesn't want this to be a political committee. He wants it to be a committee that functions. And House Intelligence is probably one of the most important ones. You know, they're always kind of a little more in secrecy, although sometimes they blow up their political arguments as of late. I don't think that's going to happen anymore with, you know, Mike Turner in charge. And so I'm looking forward to the new day. You know, I mean, it's a new day and it should be. This should not be a partisan-driven committee. As for me and Chairman Meeks, we always try to be bipartisan like we have been on Ukraine. And when it comes to these threats, I have to say, you know, I've been up here 9 terms and I go in the skiff a lot. But I've been in more this year than probably ever. And the global threats, I think, have never been greater. When I chaired Homeland, it was about ISIS and the Caliphate, but now it's about foreign nation adversary states, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. That major conflict, global conflict, can be far more explosive than, say, the little wars. When I was at the 82nd Airborne, piping the weapons into Ukraine, they said, you know, we've had a lot of little wars, like, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, and, you know, just go down the list. What makes this one different, and it's eerie, is more of a major power confrontation. That if we don't do this right and it escalates, could be World War III. And I think everyone's very mindful of that fact, and we don't want it to escalate to that. But there's a lot more at stake in this one than the others.
Thank you for taking some time for us here. It's common opinion that China is the United States' greatest adversary. With that said, what are some of the proactive measures that you would suggest to the Biden administration to take against China?
Now, there you go. Look, I think the meeting in Beijing between Mr. Putin and Chairman Xi was disturbing. They haven't always been allies historically. Remember, Nixon went to China to alienate the Soviet Union. But now we're seeing an unholy alliance. And we're seeing China now starting to bankroll Russia. They had this compact where they talked about an unlimited partnership. You know, they talked about their positions against freedom, democracy, human rights. They talked about NATO aggression, talked about, you know, allowing China to get Taiwan back because it's part of China. That's very disturbing. It's been a very disturbing breakthrough. And how's this going to move forward? I think, as Condoleezza Rice talked about, you know, President Xi's got to be looking at what Putin has done, and maybe this isn't such a great relationship after all. And maybe he's going to be questioning, you know, that relationship. But they do value that partnership, and they'll do it very deceptively because they want that option on the table to invade Taiwan, and they want Russia, you know, behind them. And so this is moving forward, you know, great world powers at stake in this decision. The things we can do to help prevent it, I don't want to talk for 30 minutes, but one is, you know, export controls. It's something we don't use very often, but it's a very powerful tool. Why are we exporting technology to China that they can use to build, say, the hypersonic weapon that's built on the backbone of American technology? You know, I looked at the Department of Commerce has entities list, states more security. I mean, defense, I should say, more security, commerce, more industry. Less than 1% of the licenses to SMIC and Huawei were denied. SMIC being their chip company, Huawei being their 5G company. So we have $40 billion going from the United States, licenses into China for their semiconductor industry, $60 billion from the United States going into China for Huawei. That has to stop. And if we are given the majority by the American people, we will be spending a lot of time stopping that. And the capital flows, which we know, if you get the entities list right, going in to fund the Chinese military, the PLA, that has to stop. And so I think you're going to see this. And there are so many other levels to discuss, on this issue, but those are a lot of the things we'll be focused on. And I think because long term, they want global economic military domination. They make it very clear. The 100-year marathon is almost like a Mein Kampf if you read it. And they've come a long ways. Why are they a developing nation under the United Nations Charter to get interest-free loans that they can then lend to truly developing nations under usurious interest rates under their Belt and Road Initiative, right? Causing a jet trap, bringing their own workers in and raping their natural resources, sending them to the Xinjiang province in China to create batteries and solar panels with lithium that they mined. And then we buy those. There's just something, there's fundamentals that are wrong. And a lot of this goes to the United Nations too, and China's influence at the UN, that we need to start countering that, as well. So I probably talked enough, but my gal's gonna like that. But thanks so much for being here today.